When Marge calls, just go ahead and Hwang up.
The corniness aside, wow, Justin, wow. Bill Hwang is going to prison, and we all know archegos blew up back in the day, but we have some firmer data. How did Mr. Hwang take his $2 billion hedge fund to $20 billion in just a matter of a short period of time? This vast gains. I would love the enlightenment of stock picking genius himself. Justin.
There is a derivative called a total return swap. And as I poorly understand it, think of it as like leasing stock from a bank, or maybe it's slightly better to say you lease the primary dealer's ability to engage in bona fide market making. So let me say that in English or whatever, right? Think back to the nickel squeeze of what happened there. You might have Bill Hwang's fund going to Credit Suisse and saying, hey, listen, Credit Suisse, we want a total return swap on numbers out of my ass here, 1,000,000 shares on GME, and we want to go short 1,000,000 shares of GME. Credit Suisse says, no problem. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to engage in this bilateral agreement. So said in English, bilateral just simply means you've got two parties, Credit Suisse, Hwang's, archegos firm, who kind of engage in an agreement that's private and it's discreet. So they both engage with each other. This is the total return swap. So if Bill Hwang's fund says to Credit Suisse, we want to go short 1,000,000 shares of GME, what this means is that if GME goes down $1, Credit Suisse will owe Bill Hwang's firm $1 million. Why? Because 1,000,000 shares times $1 down, if they're short, is worth $1 million. And they also might say, like, every quarter or whatever, we're going to settle up. So whatever happens, we're going to do this. This also might be a tie into a part of the reason we see the quarterly run-ups in GME, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Anyways, so what this also means is now, just as Bill Hwang's firm in this example went short 1,000,000 shares to Credit Suisse is now also long 1,000,000 shares to Bill Hwang's firm. And that means that Credit Suisse might say, okay, well, listen, as a primary dealer, we want to engage in the market and we want to go through and say, okay, well, listen, we do not wish to be long, nor do we wish to be short GME. So we're going to go ahead and sell in shares we do not have of GME into the market using our market maker privileges because we just want to balance our books or whatever, right?
Actually take a comparison to something that happens and is very tangible, like the repo market, to prove to you that all this is under the table. I have a good buddy. I will not name his name, but he is an he used to manage about $100 billion of capital. So he said he would have 25 billion long, 25 billion short, and then 50 billion off balance sheet, completely untrackable by anything. It is just these total return swaps or agreements between different parties. So we can see the base layer and probably compare that to the FTD cycles where these fail to deliver start to build up, and we know that we have these run-ups. But what happens underneath the surface? If we take this to the repo market, we know that there are repo fails. It's just if a repo fail is only tracking, there's so many different types of transactions in the repo market. There's trillions and trillions of transactions a day inside the repo market. It's the most fungible market in the world. The repos that we can track are strictly tri-party, which means there's a middleman and he will transact with everyone who wants to transact with them. The big ones, or one of the big ones, is Euroclear. Euroclear will just be transacting. You need, say, cash. You post collateral to Euroclear. Euroclear will give you cash. He's doing this with so many different people. He has a bunch of collateral on his balance sheet, a bunch of cash, and will lend to whoever needs lending to. That is one type of repo. That is tri-party. And when these repo fails start to spike, they report that somebody did not give back the collateral or the cash. We see today that repo fails are spiking. That is only showing the tri-party. The vast majority of transactions are done bilaterally. That just means there's two parties transacting with each other. But this is all under the table. There's no need and no incentive, in fact, the inverse incentive, to actually report any of this. There's no need to, because these people that you're doing these bilateral agreements are people that you trust and people that you've been doing business with a long time. So me and Justin will involve in a repo transaction. If I fail to deliver, that's not reported. Same thing with this FTD cycle. This FTD cycle, we are only seeing the trackment when there is a ETF that these shorts are going short on are failing to deliver. We don't know what's happening, the ones that are completely under the table. And like the repo agreements and like the repo market, bilateral agreements are many times greater than the tri-party transactions. And the tri-party transactions are the only ones shown. The same thing, I think, is what we are seeing today with GME.
Absolutely. Or maybe said a slightly different way, again, thinking back to the nickel squeeze, is that if somebody blows up all of a sudden, so going back to Credit Suisse or whatever, right, they are short 1,000,000 shares of GME to the market, but they are also long 1,000,000 shares to Bill Hwang, because Hwang's firm, archegos, is short to them. So if Hwang blows up, all of a sudden the long position, the million long shares that would net out and offset the million short shares that Credit Suisse was in, is suddenly no longer there. Credit Suisse now has to go into the market, and they basically, if they wish to balance their books, they have to buy a million shares of GME or whatever, right? And if you see the volume of GME, that's going to blow up the stock price or whatever, right? So the question then becomes, it's like, okay, well, listen, if you have this counterparty risk or this counterparty contagion, and if it's on a bilateral agreement that's not necessarily reported, or if it's being done intentionally to subvert, or not subvert, skirt, there we go, or maintain a high degree of privacy, then all of a sudden it becomes the problem of, well, just exactly who's short to who. Josh, I've made this assertion before and I will make it again. This game stops. The GME game stops when financial institutions can no longer expand their balance sheet. The total return swap mechanism, as I poorly understand it, exists as a way so that the short position can be warehoused without actually touching the balance sheet, unless, of course, something goes horribly wrong. The example of that being when Credit Suisse had to actually margin call archegos, and then their balance sheet got blown up to the tune, or what did it blew like a $7 billion hole? I can't remember. It was in the billions. It blew a hole, a relatively small fund blew a hole, billions, into the Credit Suisse balance sheet.
And you can do this with many different people. Since it's bilateral, let's say, for this example, let's just use an anonymous Chicago-based male enthusiast. Let's say they do a total return swap for 1 million shares short of a certain unknown stock. And they do this with one firm. And then, you know what? Let's say they are very, very short, and they decide to do this with a second firm, a third firm, a fourth firm. All of these are bilateral. It can be as many firms as you'd like, because all you know is that we have an agreement that any dollar this goes up, I'll pay you this at, let's say, the end of the quarter, or any dollar that is down, you pay me this. So think of it like a basketball game where you just keep score. And since we are all players, we all agree that the score is the score, we'll pay it up at the end of the day. But the time when the score goes too high and one of the teams decide to stop playing, that is when the whole system will start to come down with it.
Yeah. The other thing, too, to add to this is, let's say in order to engage in this game in the first place, you've got to post collateral. So what you might do is, again, like, I don't know if this is what happened, but just work with me here, Josh. Let's say archegos put up, again, numbers out of my backside here, $500 million worth of T-bills or whatever, right? And let's say they were on deposit at HSBC or whatever, right? You could repledge that collateral to multiple parties. So you take that $500 million and say, hey, listen, Credit Suisse, go ahead and engage this total return swap for me. Oh, and by the way, here's the collateral. See this account right here? See all these T-bills? We're good to go. They then can go and to pulling up another bank, Standard Chartered or whatever, right? Or Societe Generale or NatWest or whatever, right? Just pick any foreign bank you want. And they can repledge the same collateral over and over and over again. It's not like when a bank's looking at the statement of collateral, they can see, oh, here are the other pledges that have been done. Unless, of course, archegos in this case would disclose, oh, by the way, we're going to offer this collateral, but we kind of already offered it to some other parties too. This gets back into the collateral multiplier problem, where you have institutions that think they're relatively safe. They've got this, $500 million, T-bill hedge. But in reality, yes, that institution has a claim on that hedge, as does 20 other institutions. So the point is, there's not nearly enough, or there's not nearly the extent that's there that was thought to be there. And this is where it turns sinister, is that the banks probably know this is going on. I mean, like, Josh, if you and I can figure this shit out and talk about it poorly with limited understanding, the bankers are much smarter. Bill Hwang, they're much smarter. The Gabe Plotkins are much smarter than we are. That if they know what's going on, my suspicion is that they also know that the way they get paid from this, at least from the bank's perspective, is by the fees. They want to do the underwriting. They want to, carry on with the stuff. And this is why I say before that the only way this nonsense stops is when the system calls bullshit on the system, but the banks in this particular situation, I would argue, have the strongest of motivations for not calling bullshit on themselves, because it's so damn lucrative, or at least it's so damn lucrative until it isn't. Again, think back to Credit Suisse last year when it blew up.
Yeah, the banks are impairing their internal collateral because they think that they are on their balance sheet, they look completely safe. Well, just like in the GFC, they don't account for a unknown circumstance happening, say mortgage-backed securities tanking, because their collateral they are looking at as pristine collateral turns out to be anything but. And in fact, it is horrible collateral that their entire balance sheet is being propped up by. So what if their collateral in this case is potentially a short position on a certain stock?
Collateral they thought was pristine and that was a bedrock is anything but. And that's just like a slap in the face. It's like an existential crisis from the financial standpoint.
Yeah, because
that
on your
panics. The balance sheet, you would have to report that you are short to the market 1 million shares of GME. But the reason you have to report on your balance sheet is because you have this off-balance sheet agreement that says you're also long 100 million share or whatever the number is. And so the point is, these two things net, and because they net, it never goes onto the balance sheet to begin with.
Mhm.
Like that's the mechanism. Like it keeps it off. It stops the balance sheet from expanding to cover it until like something blows up and it's forced back onto the balance sheet. You got it?
Yeah, exactly. But what
Yeah.
happens when that goes bust? Their entire business model could potentially come down
Oh
with it.
yeah.
And this is happening on a
Yeah.
grandier scale. So it is going to be very interesting. Are we in 2006 or 2008? Who knows how far we off or how far we're off? But the more we see fragility in the system, the closer we are to the end. So there's a bunch to look at right now and a lot going on. Guys, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.
Take care, Josh.